Part 1. Police independence and constables and officers, their oath, affirmation and attestation. The topics that we'll be covering today are police independence, Robert Peel's 9 Principles of Policing, police independence and the common law, police independence, Parliament, police independence, Secretary of State, legislative framework of oath, affirmation and attestation, police independence, their current oath, affirmation and attestation, independence in summary. The affirmation, oath and attestation is a legally binding contract. Impersonation of an officer of the law is fraud, and we're obviously providing, as usual, further resources.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, so organised policing really started in the early 1800s, and there's something called Robert Peel's 9 Principles of Policing. That fundamentally set out the general instructions that were issued to each police officer at the time, from 1829. The first one is to prevent crime and disorder as an alternative to their repression by military force and severity of legal punishment. Second one is to recognise always that the power of the police to fulfil their functions and duties is dependent on public approval of their existence, actions and behaviour, and on their ability to secure and maintain public respect. And that's one of the major arguments that still lands today. Thirdly, to recognise always that to secure and maintain the respect and approval of the public means securing the willing cooperation of the public in task of securing observance of the laws. Fourth, to recognise always the extent to which cooperation with the public can be secured proportionately the necessity to the use of physical force and compulsion for achieving the police objectives.
So if we go back to the beginning of Robert Peel's creation of the Peelers is what they know.
Absolutely, yeah.
What we're basically saying is it goes back to that conversation about police constable having a whistle. Because should there be any form of breach of peace, the original concept of the police is that by blowing the whistle, the general public would come to the assistance of the constable. Yeah. So the constable was very much a respected person in the community, as a person that was there to uphold the law as a salaried position.
Yeah.
But his position was only successful if he had the support of the local community.
Absolutely.
Because in those days we didn't have 6 or 7 blue flashing lights running around all over the place. Exactly. It was a case of there's an immediate call for assistance,
and the public would just come out.
The public would respond to the whistles.
Yeah, and you'll see it actually reinforces exactly that concept as we go on. So fifth, to seek and preserve public favour, not pandering to public opinion, but constantly demonstrating absolute impartiality in the service to law. In complete independence of policy, and without regard of justice or injustice of the substance of individual laws, by readily offering individual service and friendship to all members of the public without regard to their wealth or social standing, by ready exercise of courteous and friendly good humour, and by readily offering individual sacrifice in protecting and preserving life. So again, it's about the life, the community.
Well, it's also about general socialising and the building of respect. Whereas what we're seeing today is a police force that is following orders from a government, potentially a corrupt government, rather than being a man or a woman that is actually serving the general people impartially by understanding the law. And as we know again, the general amount of law enforcement officers we're meeting do not understand the law.
Absolutely, they're just as ignorant of the law as the majority of the public are. The 6th principle is to use physical force only when the exercise of persuasion, advice and warning is found to be insufficient to obtain public cooperation to an extent necessary to secure observance to the law or to restore order, and to use only the minimum degree of force which is necessary on any particular occasion for achieving the police objective. The 7th one really reinforces what you were saying, which is to maintain at all times a relation with the public that gives reality to the historic tradition that the police are public and that the public are police. The police only being members of the public who are paid to give full-time attention to the duties which are incumbent upon every citizen in the interest of the community's welfare and existence. Absolutely reinforcing what we've been saying all along. We're all equal under the law and nobody is above the law. The eighth one is to recognise always the need of strict adherence to police executive functions and refrain from ever seeming to usurp the powers of the judiciary, of avenging individuals or the state, and of authoritatively judging guilt and punishing the guilty. So again, absolute independence. And finally, to recognise always that the test of police efficiency is, guess what? The absence of crime and disorder, and not the visible evidence of police action in dealing with them. So, if there is no crime and disorder, it means that it's effectively and efficiently achieving its objectives.
Talking of public service, if there's any background noise here, is that the local council seem to be cutting the grass outside. So if we get some background noise there, I'm afraid that's just life, isn't it?
Absolutely. So next we'll look at police independence, and as we've seen from Peel's principles, the police are independent, and we'll see now that this actually is reinforced in the law. So R versus Howell, which is a case that we've spoken about quite often, and we've seen it gives everybody equal powers of arrest for unlawful actions. The binding common law precedents, and we looked at this with how we respond to claims made against us with the police. The Commissioner of Police of the Metropolis of Razi versus Razi, which not only states is the police force independent, but each individual police officer is independent, as lawful following orders is not lawful excuse.
As they should be classed as independent.
Absolutely.
The police officer has the same right to, or the same application of their own conscience as everyone else does.
Yeah. So reaffirming the basics of law, that all are equal under the law and nobody's above the law. There is no such thing as lawful immunity. Next, Parliament, in regards of police independence, this largely is based upon the judgment from 1968, and they've been having parliamentary reviews and commissions, etc., over the centuries, really. I suppose we're now in 2000. But Lord Denning said of each chief constable that no minister of the Crown can tell him that he must or must not keep observation on his on this place or that he must or must not prosecute this man or that one. Nor can the police authority tell him so. The responsibility for law enforcement lies on him. He is answerable to the law and to the law alone. So government has no influence according to the law. And further, he argued that in the same judgment from Lord Denning, that a chief constable must take steps so as to post his men that crimes may be detected and that honest citizens may go about their affairs in peace. He must decide whether or not suspected persons are to be prosecuted. In all these things, he is not the servant of anyone save the law itself. And that's an important point, really, because many people come with the attitude, oh, you're my servant. That's not what it is. Finally, on the Secretary of State, on police independence, the Police Act 1996 states the general duty of the Secretary of State is to promote the efficiency and effectiveness of the police. Absolutely nothing about interfering with the law. And further, in the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act in 2011, Parliament have affirmed that by creating an independent legal person called the Police and Crime Commissioner, he's responsible directly to the people via this elected position, which is every 4 years. again affirming the total independence of the government and that the police are there to uphold the rule of law.
Yeah.
And we'll see this next, but now we'll talk about the oath, affirmation or attestation. So this reaffirms everything so far from what Peel has said. Everything that we see in the common law and everything we see with Parliament reaffirms this independence. And the oath is found in the Police Act 1996, section 29. This is the original oath, which every member of a police force maintained for a police area to be attested before a justice of the peace having jurisdiction within that police area. So what this is saying, anybody that's dressed up as a policeman must have taken an oath, attestation and affirmation. The current oath, it was revised in the Police Reform Act 2002, and I'll read the whole oath out. And when I say oath, it's an oath, affirmation or attestation. It's just a different way of creating an obligation under your free will. So I, my name, of the police area acting, do solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that I will well and truly serve the Queen in the office of Constable, with fairness, integrity, diligence and impartiality, upholding fundamental human rights and according equal respect to all people, and that I will, to the best of my power, cause the peace to be kept and preserved and prevent all offences against people and property. And while I continue to hold the said office, I will, to the best of my skill and knowledge, discharge the duties thereof faithfully according to law. So again, it's about the rule of law. So everything we've looked at so far totally affirms the independence of the police from those governing, and that it's the individual person, because we are all equal under the law and nobody's above the law. Now the oath or affirmation or attestation is entered into by free will, and it creates the obligation by their free will to uphold the peace and do so faithfully according to the rule of law. So it's a contract, and they get paid out of the public purse, and therefore it's a legally enforceable contract that people can stand on. So the important points being, from the oath, is to the best of my power to cause the peace to be kept and preserved and prevent all offences against people and property faithfully according to law. No mention of government, no mention of Parliament. It's all about upholding the rule of law. And even the importance of fraudulently representing to be an officer of the law is covered, and Parliament has actually seen the seriousness of this and has consequences should you impersonate an officer of the law. So Section 90 of the Police Act 1996 states, any person who with intent to deceive, impersonate a member of the police force or special constable, or makes any statement or does any act calculated falsely to suggest that he is a member of such a member or constable, shall be guilty of an offence liable on summary conviction to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months, or a fine not exceeding level 5 on the scale, as a standard scale, or both. It continues, not being a constable, a person not being a constable who wears an article of police uniform in circumstances where it gives him an appearance so nearly resembling that of a member of a police force as to be calculated to deceive, shall be guilty of an offence. So it's serious that we ensure that we understand what is the jurisdiction of this person? Is he acting under the law? And this is why we need to ask the police, are you acting under oath, affirmation or attestation? Because further, it's a breach of the Fraud Act 2006, which is false representation or failing to disclose information, or abusing their position. So the elements really about the fraud is intentionally acting or failing to act against the financial interests of another person. Dishonestly making a false representation, and that can include by omission, to make a gain for yourself or cause a loss to another. And a representation is false if it's untrue or misleading, and the person making it knows that it might be untrue or misleading. And that's the criminal standard. However, for civil, that last requirement is not required. So I think beyond a shadow of a doubt, the police oath is extremely important. It's the
I think the main point being made is do not assume that anyone approaching you in a uniform is actually a police officer.
Absolutely.
What you're doing again, it goes back to we are the ones that's challenging them to prove their standing and what their claim is.
Absolutely.
You're approaching me dressed in a uniform. Well, I'm asking you, are you here today under your oath, affirmation or attestation?
Yeah.
And I'm quite clear in my own mind that you are a law-abiding serving officer.
Absolutely.
And not someone that's actually representing them, of which we are quite sure that there are certain members.
And we saw this when we were in London on the 25th of July. We were speaking to many officers, and a lot of them had no problem affirming that they were under attestation or oath or affirmation. However, the senior officer, he simply said, they're under warrant and that's all you need to know. But there's a big difference between a warrant, because a warrant specifies the jurisdiction.
But their attitude again, that's all you need to know. Well, actually, no, that's not true.
Absolutely.
What I need to know is that I'm actually dealing with an officer, an officer of the law that will enforce the law.
Because I understand the jurisdiction is
Absolutely.
about the law. Great.
Good. Great. Thank you, Mark.